Good evening, Hanus Days. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you here this evening. Our discussion today is called To Reconcile or to Disrupt, Catholicism of the Future, preaching Christ amidst technological revolution, demographic decline, and geopolitical upheaval. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a world which is in a flux politically, technologically, and socially. We live in a time of geopolitical tensions we haven't seen in decades. Among other challenges, artificial intelligence promises to empower productivity, but it remains to be seen whether it shall not be at the expense of human flourishing and the jobs of some of us. Everything is up for grabs, and even the Pope is now an American, and we're told that would never happen. Catholicism, our faith itself, theologians tell us, is age-old and ever new. How then can our faith help ourselves, our nations, and our societies navigate this world in flux? The topic of this year's Hanus Days, inspired by the Jubilee year, is the theme of reconciliation. In our discussion today, we wish to discuss how our faith can help us navigate in this world in which parties seem increasingly irreconcilable, a world which seems not reconciled to itself. In short, our very own world, the world which is our daily bread. My name is Trizuljak. I'm a historian and a member of the Hanus Fellowship. And I'm thrilled that this evening I'm joined in discussion by three philosophical minds from across the West, from both sides of the Atlantic, from Western Europe, as well as Central Europe, as well as from the United States. Our first guest is a philosopher-poet, a leading French thinker. He has a Jewish family heritage. His parents, if I understand correctly, professed Maoist communism back in some days. He began to write in his 20s as an atheist, until one night in the center of Paris, in a very ancient church, he discovered the Catholic faith, of which he has been writing beautifully ever since. Fabrice, Hadjadj, warm welcome to Hanus Days. The second philosopher that we have among us is a philosopher-businessman. He found his own path to Catholicism from his Anglican upbringing in the United States, firstly while serving in the armed forces. A few years down the line, after intense deciding, as I learned this morning in our discussion, deciding whether to be a helicopter pilot or a military intelligence analyst. After military service, Crippen turned to a career in business and technology. And nowadays, he leads international expansion of Hallow, which is, as you will know by now, the world's #1 prayer and meditation app. Zach, a warm welcome to you as well. Finally, I'm joined by someone that many of you know very well and that I know very well. He's a philosopher-poet in heart, I think, as well. But he's also someone who, as it goes in life, ended up having a lot of managerial roles as well. And you may know him as the head of the Hanus Fellowship here in Slovakia, editor-in-chief of Verbu magazine, and also the mastermind for the last 14 years behind this festival, Hanus Days. And it is, of course, Juraj Šúst. Juraj, welcome. So thank you, gentlemen, for accepting our invitation to come to this festival, to come from abroad, and to join me in this discussion. In which we seek to discuss how Catholicism, what the future holds for Catholicism in the West, or rather what Catholicism can offer and how it can determine the future of the West. So my first question to all three of you gentlemen is, moving on to our discussion directly, we have a new Pope, and he has chosen the name of Leo XIV. And he has said that his main inspiration for choosing this name is the last Leo that we had, which is Leo XIII. And Leo XIII was mainly known for his encyclical Rerum Novarum. And indeed, as I was saying, there are many new phenomena, new events, new patterns that we see in our contemporary world. Our Holy Father will be trying to address some of those, but I also want to ask you as our first sort of broad open question, what do you think are the most important Rerum Novarum, the most important new things, maybe the most important things to which you see Christians in contemporary society need to reconcile themselves to? So if I start perhaps with Fabrice.
Thank you. It works. First, I must apologize because I wanted to travel light, and so I didn't take a suit. So I have no jacket, and they all have jackets. I'm sorry. Second, I wounded my foot, so I had beautiful shoes, you know, leather shoes, and now I'm wearing, you know, this awful, I don't know how to name that, well, baskets. And now I'm just discovering that Zach has these beautiful Thomas Aquinas socks sitting next to me. Well, I want your socks. So I'm very sorry, you know, it's not a good presentation now. Well, it is, well, you say to take the name of Leo the 14th after Leo the 13th, according to Rerum Novarum, so new things. So we have to deal with new things that are new relatively to these other new things that were before. So they are new things. Okay. But we have to remember first that when Robert Francis Prevost was created the cardinal, a journalist asked him, well, what is the most important thing for the church of our times? And he said, well, this is the same old and present and tomorrow thing, you know, announced Jesus Christ. So this is the thing, okay? Old and new and eternal and everlasting thing. So we have to remember that. We have to remember that the world is turning, but the cross stands still. And it's very important. Not be hypnotized. Because at the end, the revelation is what you have been inside, you know, this smoke world, and what was your heart. This is the judgment, and this is the principal, deep and main thing, and always ancient and new. Then, because I'm going to answer.
I was about to remind you.
Yeah. Of course, we are confronted to unprecedented questions. And I must say that we are not in, we are no longer in modernity, even in late modernity. We are in post-modern times. It means that the progressist narrative is dead. And even, you know, secularization, everything like that, you know, all this narrative, you know, going towards a new paradise on earth, and through education, through techniques, and even technology, you know. I'm sure that Elon Musk is you know, he's just bluffing. He doesn't believe what he's talking about. He knows that because he has a heart, and he has this anguish of dying in his heart anyway. But we have to be aware that we are not in the same environment. So the modern way to evangelize is now an old stuff, because now we are not anymore in a progressist world. We are dealing with despair. And wokeism is a symptom of despair. It's not a new ideology of emancipation. In fact, you have wokeism because now you know that the Western, modern, progressist lecture of history doesn't work. So when you were a black people, you would have, you may have accepted that, okay, we went through slavery, but slavery was to make a better world, you know, with health and wealth for everybody, and emancipation for black people also. But now, this narrative is dead, and now you say, well, I'm black, so there was slavery for what? There was, you know, so everybody is in this state of mind, of empire state of despair, and this is the point of our days. So every mundane, worldly hope, you know, it doesn't work anymore. So everybody is expecting for something else, and that's the reason why we have a wide, a large, open avenue to preach Jesus Christ right now. Because people are facing this alternative between extinction or mutation through cybernetics and everything like that. But they know that it's, well, it may be good to be human, to stay human. So how do we stay human? You're not in a progressive world, so you know that you have to believe that it's good now. It's good to be human. Even if we're going towards extinction or towards big technologies and that, it's good to be. Why? Because God created the human being, and because God wanted to be a human being. And now you have to believe supernatural things to keep the natural things. This is our situation. That's why we need, and we also need to use the social network to preach that with Zach.
Well, that's a bridge to Zach. Zach, what are the most important rerum novarum new things that we need to be reconciled, in which we need to find reconciliation as Catholics in contemporary world?
Yeah. So I agree with everything that Fabrice said. And as a brief note, first of all, I've been walking around this beautiful city today, my first time in Slovakia, and I'm very hot and sweaty. So I think you made the right choice to not wear the jacket. I wish I had made the same choice. Second, as a brief correction, I'm just sitting here sort of learning at the feet of Fabrice, and I'm sure I'll learn here. I'm not a philosopher businessman. I'm a businessman who likes philosophy. So I don't think I can add to what Fabrice is talking about. But maybe a couple of quick reflections from me. One, this reflection on the cross. The world changes, but the cross stands firm. The cross is, I think, the most striking visual in the entire history of art. It has geometric proportion. At the center is the incarnate Lord. But if you think about the cross as an anchor, almost as a Cartesian coordinate system, right? You have the positive above and the negative below, and the positive to the right and the negative to the left. And at the very center, at the locus of it all, at the origin, in mathematical terms, is the incarnate Christ. There's something very powerful about that. You know, to the far left, to the far right are where Christ's arms are reaching, because he is the Lord of the past and he is the Lord of the future. And obviously to downward, he is the Lord of all that is created on earth beneath, and he is the Lord of heaven above. So this is a very powerful image to sort of anchor our reflections this evening, I think, when we're considering how Jesus is the King and how Jesus is our true hope and our only true hope. And to Fabrice's point about the Son of God taking flesh, the incarnation is, of course, distinctive to Christian theology. Other religions don't have the incarnation in the same way that we do. There are some myths about gods coming to earth, but they either surrender their godness or they don't assume our full humanness. But the central mystery of the incarnation is the hypostatic union, that Jesus is fully God and fully man at the same time. And this sounds flippant, but of course, Jesus did not come to earth and become a tree or become a dog. Jesus came to earth and took on humanity. He became a man. And so that says something incredibly powerful about the uniqueness of humanity. And so to add to what Fabrice was just reflecting on, the challenges that face us, the future, the crises we face now, the future is really questions about human identity. Who are we? Wokeness is a symptom of this. Questions about human sexuality, for example, or gender are really rooted in this loss of anthropology. But the real question is, who are we? And we can only answer that question by looking at Jesus and saying, who is this? Who is this man who's hanging on a cross? So I would say, in a more practical, more concrete answer to this question, I think there are several ways that you can talk about what a thing is. You can sort of look at what it is ontologically. You can look at how it is relationally with things around it. So I might name 3 challenges here. The first is transhumanism. There is a loss. We talked about Elon Musk. There's an impetus from the most powerful among us, ostensibly the most educated or the most forward-thinking among us, although I would certainly contest that. There's a contention from them that we must enhance ourselves. I have to cryogenically freeze myself so that when we figure out the solution to cancer 300 years from now, I can be cured. Or before I die, I must upload my consciousness to the cloud. That doesn't even make sense. But these are the thoughts. This is transhumanism. That's one challenge. That challenges the very nature of our matter, of what makes us human beings. The second that affects how we relate to each other is the threat of AI. Now, I'm not a doomer who says AI is all bad. I think large language models, I talked about this last night, large language models have their place and they can really help us with research. But when we take them out of their proper place, when we forget the telos of the large language model and we instead replace it with something that is a corruption of that telos, we create massive problems for ourselves. And this is already happening with young people who are in the throes of despair because they cannot find girlfriends or whatever. Finding girlfriend chatbots and just talking to a large language model and finding companionship in that relationship with a large language model. Now, of course, it's impossible to have a relationship with a large language model because a large language model doesn't have consciousness and can't feel. But that whole idea threatens the nature of what it is to be human and how we relate to one another. And then the final thing, I think, is not AI specific, but it is the ever-pervasive threat of digital screens and how digital screens, in a very real way, supplant the relationships that all of us must have, because to be human is to relate to one another as humans. And again, we can look to the image of Jesus on the cross and say, who is this? This is someone who came to earth to die for us, not for himself, but for us. He died in relationship with us, and he left us the Eucharist as a lasting sign and sacrament of his relationship with us. So those 3 things, I think, are the new things that I see as the big challenges to our humanity.
Thank you. Juraj, what are the most important rerum novarum for you?
Well, when Fabrice was saying about renewal, everything in Jesus Christ, it reminded me it was the idea of Pope Pius X at the beginning of 20th century, and it's a new thing also today. I agree without doubt that progressivism it's philosophically dead, but culturally, I mean, in this region, in my country, seems to me be still quite attractive, even mostly for young people, of course, but I would say also for many Catholics, because if the Catholics, if young people were living this truth about the death of progressivism, it should be much more manifested than I see it in my country. So I see this the end of liberal order, let's say, or the death of progressivism as a chance for Catholicism to show, to offer a better way how to unite many particularisms of our society and to integrate them in something more fruitful than what liberals and progressivists can offer. So this is the opportunity of the ending of the global liberal order. Even though, as you said, that there are no bad times, but seems that in other sense we could say that times are not very peaceful, and people are, even young generation, are kind of being afraid of what's going to be. Even though who are attracted by progressivism culturally, not, yeah. So this is the opportunity for Catholicism, not to be just one particularism about many, but to be brave enough to offer unifying frame how to unite all those different particularisms and challenges of humanity today.
Thank you. Let us now dive more deeply into some of these topics that you have raised as the new phenomena, as the rerum novarum of our days. And the first one I want to dive more deeply into is technology. Both Fabrice and Zach touched upon the developments with social networks and with artificial intelligence. And it's interesting to me, many people that I know who work in the area of technology, the most common word that I hear from them is disrupting. I want to create a disruptive technology that will, transform our civilization. And that's what things like social networks or artificial intelligence does. And it's really interesting to me because in the past, in the middle of the second millennium, it used to be the Catholic Church which used to come to a new country and disrupt it with the missionaries, transform a culture from within, from inside. So my question to maybe Zach first, is how can we as Catholics navigate this sort of dynamism, sort of finding an appropriate relationship to technology, trying to use it to disrupt the culture from a good perspective, from a Catholic perspective. I think with your past answer, you certainly did qualify to me as a philosopher, businessman, so I'll throw it back to you.
I mean, this is something that I obviously think a lot about since I'm a Catholic who works in technology, but not just works in technology. I actually work for a company that makes an app primarily for Catholics or primarily about the Catholic faith. So it is obviously not the case. I'm obviously not a Luddite. Now that's potentially a valid philosophical framework. But it's not the case that I wholeheartedly reject technology. I do think technology can be used for the gospel. I'm generally, however, skeptical of this argument that technology is just neutral. You'll hear this sometimes, that technology is just a tool, and what matters is how you use it. There's a couple reasons for that. I think, one, when you look at, Martin Heidegger has a great essay called The Question Concerning Technology, and he traces the development of even the word technology. And he talks about the original meaning of the Greek word techne being to reveal. Technology is something that reveals the nature of reality to us. What ended up happening over the course of the last couple centuries, especially through the Industrial Revolution, and we saw this in a very powerful way in the mechanized revolutions of World Wars I and II, and into the Soviet Union, and now I would say through communist China, is the use of technology as an exercise of mastery over creation in an abusive, in a rapacious way. And so that's a very different use of technology. So rather than, for example, rather than using a bulldozer to cultivate a garden, for example, using a bulldozer to raise the Jewish synagogue here in Bratislava that was destroyed for the communists to make their bridge, right? And so that's two uses of technology with very different outcomes. But it's not even about the use of the tool. It's about the intention of the fundamental principle of the technology itself. So I'm really kind of skeptical of this idea that technology is just a tool. Because the second thing that technology does to us is it shapes who we are. And so I might use my phone in one way, you might use your phone in another way, but it actually will shape our habits. And we now know this from a biochemical, neurological perspective, that young people now who are spending more time on their phones are much more likely to have dopamine excesses in their brains that fundamentally alter their brain's chemistry and therefore affect how they relate to one another and make them much more prone to despair and suicidal ideation and the like. So this is a very real question of how we actually leverage technology, how we approach technology. But I think I do appreciate the framework of approaching technology or evaluating technology as opposed to leveraging technology, because it's not just a tool, it actually does shape who we are. But I do think, obviously I work for a Catholic app, I do think that we can and should be active in technological spaces in the world of bits, in places where we can have an apostolate for Jesus Christ. What we do there should always be pointing to the truth of the resurrection. Now, last night I talked about this a little bit. My personal conviction is that all truth is God's truth. So it is God's truth that Jesus died on the cross as the God-man. It is also God's truth that 2 + 2 = 4. And so all truth is God's truth. All truth is Catholic truth. So when I say that we should use digital means to advance the gospel, I don't just mean make a podcast feed for your pastor's homilies or make a podcast feed for you to talk about Catholic things. I mean use technology to advance the true, the good, and the beautiful, because those are the things of the gospel. Those are ultimately all things that point to the reality of the transcendent God. We also, though, have to be mindful that for some of us, that might be harder than others. Some of us might be more prone to these dopamine excesses or deficits. Some of us might have a harder time putting our phones down. And if that's the case, then maybe technology is not for you. Maybe you should just go grab a book instead of embracing your Kindle. Maybe you shouldn't have a Twitter account. But if you are not prone to those excesses and you are called to advance the gospel in those digital spaces, then you should be there. Because if you're not there, who will be there? And so we need to be prepared to defend and advance the gospel in all the digital domains that exist, and not just the physical world, but also the world of bits.
Fabrice, last night you spoke beautifully about what I would call a crisis of desire in contemporary society, which in some ways is created by this excess of technologies that we are surrounded by. How can we reawaken desire within us as human beings, as Christians? How can we help as Christians our fellow human beings in our countries reawaken desire without throwing our phones into the bin if we need to use them, to let our kids know that they should be coming home for dinner or other practical purposes?
First, there were other questions before this one, so I want to say something. First, I'd like to say that this guy is wonderful because he has Thomas Aquinas' socks and Heidegger's quotes. So you're a real philosopher, businessman, everything. No, that's true. And because your first question was about disruption. And you said, okay, there is a good disruption and a bad disruption, or how to disrupt with disruption. It was your idea. Well, we may say how to find a tradition. To disrupt with disruption is the question of tradition. And in fact, preaching the gospel well, according to the Acts of the Apostles, is always revealing something very new, beyond the natural things. But this new thing comes from the author, the creator of nature. So it's also something that is deeply rooted in nature. So when Saint Paul and Saint Barnabas, how do you say that in English? Barnabas? Yeah, Barnabas go in Lycaonia, in Lystra. They say we want to preach this new, well, it's not a new God. It's not a new God. We are preaching the one who has been with you during all your days. Before, he was already there. And we're here to reveal something that was already there. And so you have these two things in Revelation, something absolutely new, but coming from before times, because it is eternal. So it reveals also what, well, when the Greek entered in the Christian belief, they rediscovered what was real Greek philosophy. Okay? It was not just trash and then no. If we read Plato right now or Aristotle, it's because of a Christian monastery, a father of the church, reading them and revealing the truth inside this old text. So this is the main thing. It is new, but it's not, just disrupting. It's not the good way. It's like, it's a renewal. So the other thing you want me to talk about desire. Before coming here, I was reading, the end of Don Quixote, and Sancho Panza, as Don Quixote dies, and he said, "I'm so sorry, I was a crazy man, and I was mad, and you followed me, and you shouldn't have." And Sancho say, "No, you were a great master for me, because the worst madness is to let you die. Let you die, not being slain by another, but die of melancholia. Let you die." And I understand now that Sancho Panza was talking about, death of desire to live. And what is this, this vanishing of desire? Well, this is the problem of consumerism. And you can see that in the famous Aldous Huxley's novel, A Brave New World. In this Brave New World, as soon as you want to be with a girl, you need to have that girl immediately. So the desire cannot arise. So the desire cannot, be an excavation of what is deep in your heart. So you have to go immediately to satisfaction. And this is the problem. You need something, you push. We are in a push-button society. So you're pushing buttons. You cannot go through the death of satisfaction and through the resurrection of desire. This is the problem. So you push button, and when you cannot push the good button, Well, you need a trigger. You push the trigger. That's the problem. So how can you arise desire again? So I spoke of handworks, you know, the passions of working and reading, of course, and being in a community, stay together, not to have quick informations, but be there. To have a wife through fidelity, because you know you learn. Yeah, well, it's you have to be patient, and with children and wife, you know. So you're learning desire, in fact, also. So I think this is the point. But I'm not afraid, because you know I think that the upcoming generation is in an addiction, but also knows that it is an addiction, and is tired with that. And you have new thing, you know. For example, what was the pilgrimage of Saint James, Saint Jacques de Compostelle? How do you say? Santiago. Well, during the Middle Ages, to go on pilgrimage was a spiritual experience, you know. But now, I have my students, you know, they go on the road to Santiago, and they come to me and they say, oh, you know, we did something wonderful this summer. I say, what? We walked. Well, everybody was used to walking during the Middle Ages. So going on pilgrimage to Santiago was not a matter of walking. But now, because we have wheels, because we have Teslas, people say, wow, this is wonderful. You know, I made a big discovery. This summer, I walked. And this is great. This is, you know, this is the contrast with, you know, this invading technology is the rediscover of our body, of elementary moves. And I think this is great. Well.
So walking is one of the new things now?
Yeah. The new thing in town.
Bring back the walk.
If I can just add very briefly. So Brave New World is one of my favorite books. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend this book. And Fabrice is absolutely right that the sort of immediate gratification of desire is fundamental to the plot there. But in the book, the people are also divided into classes, social classes. And so there's the alphas, the betas, the epsilons, and so forth. And it's really the ones at the high end of the social strata that actually can have their desires sort of fully met, if you will. The lower classes are drugged, essentially, into compliance. You know, so they have these desires, but they're not allowed to act on them. And of course, even the higher classes, when they act on them, you know, they commit sexual acts with one another, which really amount to sexual violence. And so they're certainly not replicating the self-giving love of Catholic teaching. But the lower classes can't even have that, so they just pop what's called soma pills. Soma being from the Latin for pain, right? So that just sort of like deadens the pain. And I see in that an analog to the way we use technology today, you know. And I mean, how many young men are desiring relationships, but they've sort of deadened their soul to such an extent through digital means that they can't bring themselves to actually go out and find a real woman to love and to woo and to pursue towards marriage. So instead, they just indulge their desires in the digital world, right? And this is certainly part of the problem.
Brave New World, that's a book that has been a stable part of the syllabus in the formation program of the Hanus Fellowship. which Juraj designs every year for the new incoming members for the Hellenic Fellowship to read. And I want to take that as a sort of stepping stone to a next topic, which we hinted at already, and that is this topic of arguably some commentators call the post-liberal moment at the end of the sort of unipolar era dominated by liberal democratic countries in the West especially. And I think it relates to the point about consumerism and some sort of inner workings of Western capitalism. For some time, it worked well for us in the West. It made us the richest countries in the world. Slovakia, after the merge from communism, has grown richer. Certainly, I think Slovaks today are better off than they have ever been in the past. But that also creates this sort of struggle of consumerism, which leads to the crisis of desire. And it kind of seems, and this is what many commentators say, and this is something that Juraj has highlighted in his introductory remarks, it kind of seems that this sort of liberal democratic regime, which has kind of grown up from the Christian foundations, especially in Europe, while it was, and because it was cut off from its Christian roots, has kind of run out of gas. So I want to give you a chance, Juraj, to expand a little bit more. What do you think this? So many Christians, I think, in Slovakia, also across Europe, are kind of wary. Well, we have this sort of new, strange populist movements which are rising across Europe. The kind of first impetus come from the United States. And you have already kind of suggested a dilemma, whether this is a sort of scary moment for Christians. Some Christians want to make allies, want to be part of the alliance of Trump, for example, in the United States. But you have said that this sort of dynamic, this exhaustion of liberal democratic regimes is actually an opportunity for us as Christians. So can you expand on that, and how can we seize this opportunity?
Well, maybe I will, if I can say a few words about relation of culture to technology a bit. Both Fabrice and Zach were speaking about how technology is a danger for human nature, and I would add to that it's also a danger for relation to God, because it fosters secularization. I mean, if we live more and more in technological world, then we somehow have then we only experience the world that was created by ourselves, and we are losing the meaning of dependence on God. In other words, maybe we are losing the desire for God, which is behind the reality, which is creator of the reality. So I would say that in order to renew the Christian culture in post-liberal West, we need something. We need renew the relations to nature first, or together with renewal of Christianity, we also need renewal of nature, to living more closely with nature. Yeah. So that was first thing, and what about the using of post-liberal moment? I mean, well, let me see my notes to save time. I think that maybe one of the first things for Catholics today is rejection of secularism as a normal and proper cultural standard in the West or in the Central Europe. During last maybe 100 years, maybe in the West 200 years, people somehow got used to secularization, secular society, secular public order, and now maybe it's the time to reclaim Christ even in public space. And when we mentioned Leo XIII encyclical Rerum Novarum, I like one sentence from this encyclical, and I will quote that sentence. In English translation, it's part 41, but in Slovak one, it's 22. I don't know the difference. Why is it? But the sentence is this, and I think it's a great two sentences. Wherefore, if human society is to be healed, only a return to Christian life and institution will heal it. In the case of decaying societies, it is most correctly prescribed that if they wish to be regenerated, they must be recalled to their origins. So, I'm not sure if I see Christian revival in Slovakia already, but I'm quite sure that I saw this revival in the United States and in France recently.
You walked quite a bit last weekend in France, didn't you?
And I agree with Fabrice's descriptions that, well, I'm not sure if I learned walking, but I'm sure that I was
Maybe share what was the walk. I'm not sure if
absolutely tired, and I thought that I'm not able to finish the charters. And it was kind of religious, mystic experience that, despite my creepy body, I somehow got there finally. And I think it's a kind of symbol and metaphor of religious life, that it doesn't depend on us. It depends on God. But we need not to know this just theoretically. We need to have this truth in heart. And that's why pilgrimages could help us to renew this deep knowledge. But what I wanted to say that on this pilgrimage there were 20,000 people and maybe 18,000 were young people. It's absolutely unique. I mean, in Central European context, when mostly older people are going to pilgrimages. And on this pilgrimage, there wasn't like the pop singers from the culture who sing pop songs with some Christian words in order young people feel more comfortable in their religion, and that they didn't seem to feel like we are weirdos or something. No, they just prayed rosaries, sang traditional songs. I mean, Gregorian chants. Yeah, Gregorian chants. And were quite joyful, like they weren't aware that they are living in a post-liberal society with all these dangers we are speaking about. They weren't aware of it, seemed to me. And it was a really joyful and fascinating experience for me. And last years, I spoke to several Catholic thinkers, intellectuals from United States. For example, Gregory Pine, Scott Hahn, Matt Fred, and few others. And they said that in the United States, they feel that they experience something similar what I experience in France, that there are more and more communities of young Catholic families who live quite, who want to renew their traditions and live it boldly, and not to care about separation of their Catholic identity from public life. And yes, I think that this might be the way how to use this post-liberal moment culturally.
How do you imagine these sort of inspirational moments of revival like we have experienced in Charters last week in France? How can you see that being translated to wider society, wider culture, wider maybe in politics, in public life? Is it too early to expect that, some of this will kind of bubble through to the higher levels of our societies? That would be my question to both of you as well.
I would say I like the phrase of Scott Hahn, who was saying about Stockholm syndrome, that Catholics shouldn't live according to liberal principles, not knowing that they are living according to liberal mainstream culture, and they start to live according to Catholic principles, and they would see that this life is more fruitful, deeper, joyful. And I would say this is the way how to evangelize. You cannot offer what you don't have, and if you don't live a joyful life of joyful family life with a lot of kids, a lot of joy, what you can say to the world? But if you are doing this, you already said almost everything you could in certain sense.
Fabrice, can you see this sort of dynamic of moments of religious revival translating? Do you see it translating, being familiar with the French context, translating in any ways to sort of higher floors of French culture, society?
Well, first we had a wonderful moment, because when Juraj, he was talking about renew our relation to nature and go out from an all artificial world, so we can. And he had this moment of silence, and I say I want to save time reading my notes, but we had this moment of silence, and I heard the birds sing. So you are, accomplishing what you were saying through your silence. And we need these moments, I'm always afraid when you have, this kind of lectures, of conferences, the lack of silence, the lack of, it's easier for me right now because I'm not a good English speaker, and nor Juraj, so we have to be a little bit more, mute and dumb to be able to speak, permanent miracle. But anyway, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I agree with the political part of because we need to make this distinction between. I'm not sure of the words, but Christendom and Christianity. Is it good? Yeah, Christendom. So Christendom is, because the question is, of course, it's good to speak, to talk, to say that God exists, God is a question, God is a religion, He is a topic in the public space. Of course, it is good. But was the society better during the Middle Ages? This is my question. We had Christian institutions, well, according to Christendom, but not in accordance with Christianity sometimes, So this is my question, in fact. Of course, we have to talk about God, to talk about our hearts. But as soon as it comes in the public space, you still have a danger, and maybe the worst danger, you know, because you're not a Christian servant, but just a civil servant. And you think that because you're saying Christ, Christ, okay, that's okay. But if you remember of Matthew 25, you know, the damned and doomed, they're always saying, you know, Christ, when I didn't visit you, I didn't, when it was you, when it was your name, when it was your, you see. So we have to be aware of this distinction between, you know, Christendom and Christianity, and to be aware not to change the mystery of God into just a civil religion. And this is the problem of the United States. As soon as the Federal Reserve didn't have the gold for its money, they put "In God We Trust" on the bill. You see? So this is the civil religion. And in fact, we have a pope. He's of course he took the name of Leo after the Leo 13, 14. But he's also a son of Saint Augustine. And according to the City of God, Saint Augustine says, okay, the problem is that the Christianity is about the kingdom of hearts. It's not just, you know, Christian of the public space. It's good. We can talk about, well, we can preach the gospel. We can talk about Christ in the public space, of course. But it's not the point. It's not the main point. And you will always have, you know, these two cities, the city of the hearts, the city of God, and the city of how do you say that, pride, or they're always intertwined. And you have this letter of Saint Augustine who says, oh, now everybody is a Christian. And if you want to make business, you have to say, oh, you have to say Jesus Christ, you know. This is the better signature to make business. And if you want to steal someone, you have to say Jesus Christ. You know, everybody is talking about Jesus right now, you know. But God sees in your heart. And this is the point.
Maybe can...
Please, Juraj, if you want to comment.
If you allow me, 2 points as a reaction. Of course, that Catholic conformism is disgusting. Of course. But aren't you even more afraid the current situation in which we live in a so deep secularization that even the question God is dead doesn't have sense, because it only has sense when you have at least some transcendence, maybe far away in the horizon, but still there is something. But we live in a space when even to ask this question, it's uncultured.
Yeah, of course. And what you're saying is very Nietzschean, because, you know, in the aphorism of God is dead, the madman talking like that, you know, he's madman, he's not addressing Christians but atheists. And, you know, he's talking to atheists. And he says, God is dead. And they just, you know, laughing and mocking him. And he says, so what? It's not a problem. And this is, and so it was an issue for Nietzsche, and it was, you know, something very important. So why am I answering like that? It's because what you're talking about is not just about a lack of Christianity in the world, and you don't have the nostalgia of Christendom. That's not my suspicion. But I think that the problem is a lack of humanity. You cannot even have in front of you a rational atheist. Well, I would love to have a guy like Friedrich Nietzsche in front of me. But the problem is that this is the lack of humanity, the lack of reason, the lack of, and this is the I think
because
the main
because the question it's kind of out of rational horizon of today's culture.
But reason is out of the horizon of today's unculture. That's what I think. You cannot talk about, you know, a push-button society as a culture. It's not a culture.
And the second remark, one sentence. You mentioned Augustine, and Augustine said that the kind of first principle of justice is justice towards God. Do you think that there is a possible to have a secular justice if we are unjust to the person, to the God who we should be the most just?
Do you want to just respond very shortly, Fabrice? Then I want to bridge it on to Zach and move on to the next theme, please.
I try to be short and not too silent. It's a question of time. But it's good to be silent, I say it again. I think that, of course, talking of religion as justice towards God, okay, this is you know, religion is a part of the treatise on justice in the theological sum of Thomas. Okay, so of course you can see it through justice, but it's not just the point, because the relationship with God as our creator and a savior is not based upon justice but on mercy. So in fact your question is I think is that can we have a true justice without mercy, without the intelligence of the infinite dignity of each human being? So a true justice must be a relation to the other as another, and not just, you know, a relation to an object to re-equilibrate, you know, a sum of problems. You see, so that's the problem. But I think that we need, in fact, a Judeo-Christian atmosphere to do that. That's true. It's not just a question of our personal faith, but to be, in fact, in the atmosphere of this Christian culture, of course. And I agree with you.
If I may, I want to bridge this question over to Zach and to return to the sort of practical political aspect of these questions of justice towards God and the place of secularization. Some people say that we live today in a post-Christian or post-secular, perhaps, moment. And often these sort of comments come from American commentators. And I want to kind of dive more deeply to the American context and ask you, Zach, about how you are thinking, or along what lines are you thinking in the framework of what do you see as appropriate place. What is the appropriate place for Christians or serious Catholics, serious Christians in contemporary America, where you can clearly see that the sort of wokeism has been exhausted? It has been quite strongly defeated in the last election. The alternative, we're kind of, I think many of us are happy that wokeism was defeated. we are a bit uneasy maybe about the alternative. You have, on your podcast, if I have watched closely some of your episodes, you're overall a critic of Trump, if I may say so, you may correct me. But you also have some interesting comments to share, for example, about J.D. Vance, who is his vice president, who is a convert to Catholicism, whose confirmation name is St. Augustine. He, on J.D. Vance's path to conversion, reading St. Augustine was one of the main factors. And I think it's interesting to ask this question to you as well, because J.D. Vance, while he was still working in venture capital as an investor, his firm, Naria Capital, was one of the early investors into Hello, if I'm not wrong. And also, you just shared with me earlier today that you almost got J.D. Vance before his star rose on your podcast about 10 years ago. So I want to ask, how do you comment on the path of somebody like J.D. Vance, who is a serious Catholic, who doesn't mind joining the alternative to wokeism? And what is the sort of framework on how you are thinking about how we can navigate this situation as Christians in this post-liberal, post-Christian, post-secular, however you prefer to define this moment?
First, maybe a couple comments in response to what was already said. I think I mostly agree with Fabrice on this distinction between Christianity and Christendom. To me, so there's a lot of discussion globally, especially in Europe, but really probably primarily in the United States about the post-liberal moment. This has been really since the first Trump election, when he first was elected to the presidency. But people like Gladden Papin or Patrick Deneen have been writing a lot and talking about how liberalism is really rotten to its very core, and that really is the crux of the issue. And if we must advance to a Christian society, it must be through post-liberal means. And they have a lot of cheerleaders on their side of the debate, but I'm very skeptical of their argument, and I'm skeptical for a couple reasons. But one topic of my study in Oxford was the construction of the international system since 1950. The entire world had been through two devastating world wars, each of which was in succession the most devastating war that the world had ever known. And the thinking was that what got us to those moments was the old system of alliances and treaties and really Christendom. It was sort of like the death throes of Christendom, in to some extent at least. You can see that in the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, for example. And so the alternative then was this positivist turn in the social sciences. And the thinking was, okay, political theory and political theology didn't serve us well because look what happened. So let's create political science, and let's make economics a social science, and let's figure out how we can design the perfect society. And so that's where we've been since 1950, and that's the birth of the European Union is very much a part of that. The birth of the modern system of multilateralism and non-governmental led institutions and alliances is very much a part of that story. The problem is that that's gotten us here. So that is also very wrapped up in this very secular moment that Juraj is talking about. That we find ourselves now in an incredibly secular moment where the question of whether or not God is dead almost doesn't even make sense, because it almost doesn't really have any antecedent that properly suits that question to be asked. So, but my critique though of the post-liberals on this question is not simply that I think they're identifying that something is rotten to the core, or at least rotten partially to the core, but they're identifying the wrong thing. So liberalism has also given us some incredible wins in the realm of human dignity and human rights, and liberalism is certainly a massive part of the story of the fall of the Soviet Union, for example. And so it's not all bad in my telling, but what's rotten at the core is the heart of man. And this is what I think Fabrice was getting at a little bit. We are all sinners. So my work in graduate school was trying to recover this school of international relations that thrived in the middle part of the 20th century called Christian realism. And Christian realism was trying to set up really an alternative framework for evaluating political actions. The predominant one was realism that then morphed into what's called neorealism. And neorealism essentially sees the international system as a billiard ball table. And the nation states are just balls that collide into one another on a billiard table. And they collide more or less with mathematical precision in accordance with mathematical laws. Now, not actually mathematical laws, but the idea is that we can sort of identify the variables. Okay, if this country with this GDP goes up against this country with this GDP, and 75% of the people in this country believe this, and 55% of the country believe that, if we can isolate enough of the variables, we can figure out what's exactly going to happen and how the conflict's going to go. The reason why that's so short-sighted is because it overlooks the fact that the ultimate wild card at the center of all human action is the human heart and the free will at the heart of the human heart, at the center of the human heart. And so Christian realism took that problem seriously and said, we need to look at international relations through the lens of human anthropology. And this is, again, where Augustine comes in. So someone like Reinhold Niebuhr is a Christian cleric writing at the time, predominantly in Christian realism, would draw on Augustine, for example, who talks about the real problem of sin at the heart of the human soul. So this is where I think the post-liberals go wrong, is they look back to Christendom and they say, wow, if only we could return to the Middle Ages. But there are a lot of things that were bad in the Middle Ages too. And there are a lot of things about the Middle Ages where I wouldn't want to live in the Middle Ages. But what they miss is that a post-liberal society will have just as many problems, maybe even more, if we neglect the seriousness of the sin at the heart of the human. So now, to circle back, big circle, to your question, Samuel, I mean, it's great to see Catholics returning to public life in such a visible way as J.D. Vance has. That's very encouraging to see. My concern always is that each of us as human beings are image bearers of God, imago Dei, but those of us who are baptized Catholics are image bearers in an even special way. One of my favorite hymns from my Anglican days talks about how it's called Lift High the Cross, and it talks about how every believer bears on his brow the seal of the crucified, right? So each of us has been baptized, and we've been transformed and received the gift of the Holy Spirit through that baptism. And so we become in an even special way bearers of Christ. And so when we neglect to love our neighbor, or we turn the political project into a Christian project, or we equate those two things and say that they're same. They overlap for sure, but they're not the same. Or when we instrumentalize the faith and we employ the language of the faith in order to achieve political ends, that is doing an incredible disservice to the cause of Christianity, and it is not what image bearers of Christ should do. So I'm very glad that J.D. Vance is a Catholic, and he's not been a Catholic for very long, but we should all pray for him for sure. He has one of the most high visibility positions in the U.S. government, obviously, and I'm very optimistic and hopeful. And he's a very intelligent person and is saying and thinking a lot of good things. But my prayer for him, and this is not a critique or a judgment of him now, but my prayer for him is that he bears witness above all to the love of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I want to say something. In fact, we cannot reduce J.D. Vance to this little small thing, being vice president of the United States, because it's a very little thing. The great thing is that he's a Christian, he's a Catholic, and I want to quote, the first quote of Saint Augustine from Pope Leo XIV. He said, "For you, I'm a bishop. With you, I'm a Christian." And you know that Augustine, in this sermon, he says that the great dignity is to be a Christian, because as a Christian, I receive the grace that saved me. But being a bishop is a burden. Being a bishop is a danger. Being a bishop is a threat. You see? Mm-hmm. So that's the point. You have this J.D. Vance, and the circumstances made him the vice president of the United States. But first, he has to be a Christian in this situation, and this is the big and the great thing.
Yeah, but if I may follow up on that, it's precisely kind of what I'm getting at. I think being a bishop is a burden, being a statesman is a burden, being a Christian statesman is a burden all the more. And to me, at least from the outside, I don't live in the United States, I read a lot about what happens there. I find it an interesting phenomenon that, he might be the next US president, and I see him being kind of connected, and the rise of J.D. Vance in the American context, I kind of see it related to something that Juraj was talking about before, this sort of revival of Catholic apostolates, online ministries. Certainly, the American church is very lively intellectually, I would say. And of course, you can't just reduce that to therefore J.D. Vance, or of course, it's much more complicated. And there are many, Catholics who have critical things to say of J.D. Vance, but I kind of see him as a sort of one small aspect of this liveliness of the church in the good sense of the word in the U.S. context, and the prospect of, the most powerful political person being a serious Christian, viewing his office as a burden and as a place of service. I mean, that in some ways, we'll see how it goes, he certainly in our prayers. We'll have strong disagreements with him, perhaps in Europe on some occasions. But I find that it's a sort of, we haven't really seen Christians in such opportunities, in this sort of opportunities to, in which if he thinks about it well, he can do a great good. If he messes up, he will mess up. But I think it's an exciting moment in this regard. But if I may, I will move on to one last topic that I want to ask to all three of you. Then we'll open up the floor to our audience as well. And I will just try to be very brief. One of the topics that we touched on in the introductory round was the anthropological crisis that we are facing, that the most fundamental questions in which perhaps our civilization today goes wrong. These questions are anthropological, and they translate to questions of sometimes sexuality and gender. And that kind of translates to what many people call demographic crisis. We're not having enough babies. J.D. Vance says, I want to see more babies in the United States of America. I want to see more babies in Slovakia. And I want to say to our audience that tonight, our three guests in this discussion combined are fathers to 21 children, if I understand correctly. So Fabrice has 10 children of his own, Zach has 5, Juraj has 6, so that's 21. I think if Western civilization took some good advice from you, we certainly wouldn't be facing demographic crisis. So how can we turn this upside down? I think if anybody can solve this for us, it's the three of you.
It was a great pleasure to face this demographic crisis like that.
Well, share. What's the know-how? How do you do this? Your word, perhaps.
Well, I mean, the beautiful wife is the answer, and everything it's there. I would say, I don't know, but maybe you guys should correct me, but we didn't make a decision to have, 10 children or number of children. We just love each other with husband and wife, and the children are coming.
Yeah, I think there's... in fact, the threat is to turn this question into a political question, and to see it only through demography and through natalism. Because you can say, oh, we don't have enough children, and you may be in the Third Reich. We have to make babies to be in a widest Lebensraum. So you see, no, all the matriarchs of the Bible, they were sterile first. They couldn't have a baby, because what you see in the good book is that a baby is a gift of God. It's not just something in the program. The Holy Family has just one child, not 10.
Enough to change your history, it seems.
Of course. Well, this is a very peculiar child, and very exhausting.
Gets lost in temples and.
But so it was impossible to have another one then. But anyway, we must be afraid to take this question, through statistics, and through what we must say is that a child appears in a relation of love between a man and a woman. Sometimes they cannot have a child. Sometimes they have one child, 2, 3, maybe 10 or 12, as Jacob. But Jacob, it was with 4 women. I only have 1. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cheating, it's like-
He's a cheater. Well, Jacob was always a cheater, you know that. With his brother, with me. Okay. But so this is an adventure, and the question is not a question of number, okay? It's a question of value, and a question of hope, in fact. So you want. I'm not sure that I wanted to have a child. Well, it happened. I was not very good in biology, so I didn't catch the thing, you know, in the lesson. I just loved my wife, and then she said, well, we're going to have a child. I said, how that? But in fact, it's pretty true what I'm saying, you know. It's just the order of reality. You love someone, the child appears. And it's not just a mechanical consecution, in fact. This is an event. And we have to cheer this event as an event. So, but it is in fact it is a question of love and hope, more than a political question. And I don't want to reduce it to the political question of natalism. It may be a question. I'm not saying that it is not a question, but I'm not a politician, and I must remind that this is the event of bringing someone new in the world, so the world is more beautiful, so the world is renewed through this new gaze upon the world.
I completely agree with that. On the natalism point, I think an example of obviously an example of bad natalist policy, but really an example of a policy that looks at family growth as strictly a process of reproduction, is the Chinese Communist Party's one-child policy that was in place for many decades, right? You're only allowed 1 child, and there were multiple side effects of that. 1, people tried to have less children. 2, lots of back alley abortions because of the generally patrilineal succession of economic inheritance in China. People wanted sons, so they would kill their daughters. I mean, just horrible things. Children with disabilities would be murdered by their own parents. Horrible, horrible things. Really just a demonic perversion of the type of love that Fabrice is talking about. On the other side of the coin, you know, government's job should never be to mandate quotas for families, right? This isn't about the numbers, to Fabrice's point, but a good natalist policy will make it easier for families to participate in that gift of in that love of self-gift that results in people. 2 more things very quickly to Fabrice's point about this being an event. It's not reproduction. I mean, it drives me nuts when people talk about women's reproductive health. Dogs reproduce, trees reproduce, humans procreate, because every act of self-gift in the conjugal act that reduces in a child is procreation. It's actually a participation in God's act of creation, which is why we call it procreation. So we don't reproduce, we procreate. And as an expression of hope, there are many people today who I talk to and say they won't have children, or they won't have many children, because climate change is going to collapse the planet. And this I think you might have spoken about this a little bit yesterday, right? Progressivism is dead because it sort of breaches ecological catastrophe, and because the climate change is going to end the world in 20 years, I'm not going to have children. God, I want to subject them to the death of that. But the Christian looks at the world, despite how dire everything may seem, right? Despite the fact that you may have been a Christian, you know, under Soviet rule in Russia, you can still procreate and give birth to children, because your hope is not in delivery here and now. Your hope is in the hope of the resurrection. And this child that God is gifting to you is an ensouled body whom he wants to deliver and he wants to bring to resurrection at the last day. So that's I think the most Christian way to think about having families is not reproduction, it's procreation. It really is an expression of eschatological hope, that we have hope that at the end, Jesus Christ wins.
Just to wrap it up, you very, very shortly, we have to come to questions from the audience now.
Yes, I would say that the demographic question it's a side note of secularism and individualistic secularism, when everything is about you and not about someone else. And to have children, it's about care of someone else. It's about joy and love of someone else, which is of course connected with suffering, but this suffering is necessary for love and joy. So you cannot have one without another.
My brother works, very quickly, my brother works at Google, and he ran into a coworker the other day who was explaining that his wife had chosen to be a stay-at-home mom. And my brother was congratulating him on prioritizing family for their family. And he said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "It sounds like you were saying that your wife had chosen to stay at home with the kids." And he said, no, it's not a stay-at-home mom of kids, a stay-at-home mom of cats. And so this is a reflection of where we are in America, that people they're so concerned about coming economic collapse or the end of the world for Trump or whatever, that they won't even have children, they'll just have cats instead.
Yes, just as a short sort of final concluding comment, just to highlight Juraj's point about secularization, maybe how it relates to this. There's this American Catholic professor at Catholic University of America called Catherine Pakaluk. Maybe you're familiar with her work. And she, as an economist, as a Catholic economist, studied the questions of demography. And she basically studied the cases of large families in the United States across really large samples, and tried to provide some policy solutions for the government. And she basically said that all of the cases, or the strongest factor which explains why in all of these cases these families do end up having big families, is their religious attributes. So they are either Jewish, they might be Muslim, very often they are Christians. So I think there's this sort of very deep connection to, Zach, you mentioned, there's this sort of eschatological hope as an aspect of procreation. I think the burdens of having a hard family are perhaps unbearable without God, at least so it appears to our contemporary society. And I think the case of all three of you being a devout man probably has something to do with the flourishing of your families as well.
But you must be aware, because through the religion title with everybody inside, like in the big bag, it's a problem, because I heard an imam saying having a lot of children is the jihad of women. You see, so it's not the same purpose. It's not the same purpose. It's not the same thing. You have a lot of children, but it's not the same thing at all. So we have to understand that.
Agreed. Yeah. Now, before we launch onto a few questions from the audience, I want to invite a couple of musicians, to provide a short intermezzo for us. I will turn to Slovak for a short moment. Pozývam na pódium Alžbetu Dzurovú, ktorá hrá na flaute. Tento rok bola študentkou Akadémie muzičnej Krištofa Pendereckého v Krakove. Okrem nej by som rád pozval medzi nás aj Sáru Osvaldovú, ktorá je študentkou štátneho konzervatória v Bratislave a tiež študentkou Akadémie umení v Banskej Bystrici. Zahrajú nám skladbu od Mozarta In diesen heiligen Hallen. Prosím, privítajte ich potleskom. So now we have some time to take questions from the audience shortly. I would like to remind you all that you may contribute with your questions to... I was about to say Hello. No, you can contribute with your questions. You should certainly also subscribe to Hello, which is the application which Zach's firm develops. But you can submit your questions through Slido now. And we will shortly choose some of them. I want to ask if anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question. There's a gentleman in the suit in the third row. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My question is to Zach. When you critiqued Patrick Deneen and the post-liberals, I recently read his book, Why Liberalism Failed. And in a nutshell, I guess his argument why liberalism is rotten to the core was that it proposed freedom dissociated from virtue ethics, from true responsibility, from virtue ethics, from Aristotle. So I was quite surprised when you sort of criticized the idea that it's rotten to the core, and to put it in a provoking way, if you didn't say something contradictory to the socks of St. Thomas Aquinas. Yeah.
So, I mean, it certainly depends on what we mean by liberalism. What I was saying, I wasn't saying that Patrick Deneen, I mean, Patrick Deneen I've heard him say liberalism is rotten to the core. And yes, he elaborates on that. I mean, in his telling, it is the freedom that's sort of untethered from virtue ethics. But I don't think that's what liberalism has to be. I don't think that's what liberalism always has been. There are certainly examples of that. I think even the French Revolution is a very early example of that, for example. But it's not the case that the liberalism that the church, for example, embraced in the 20th century was that. I mean, the encyclicals of the popes for the second half, well, throughout the 20th century have really been explicit that liberalism must be tethered to the virtues in order to be successful, in order to be conducive to human flourishing. And I think that can be the case. My contention is that the real problem here is that we don't take seriously the condition of human sin. And when we advance a liberalism that does not take that seriously and emphasizes freedom über alles, which is essentially Deneen's argument, right? So in that sense, I agree with him. Then that is a problem. So if your only way of envisioning liberalism is freedom totally unmoored to a Judeo-Christian foundation or the classical virtue ethics, then that certainly will be rotten to the core. I don't think that's necessarily the only way that liberalism can happen.
I want to ask the next question from Slido. It's one of the most popular questions. It's in Slovak. I'll translate it for our guests. I think it's a nice question for all three of you. An anonymous person is asking, Christ spoke a very simple language in a way so that he was well understood by all. Isn't it the problem with evangelization today that the evangelists use a language which is overly complicated? Anybody willing to take up that?
I mean, I just very briefly, I'll start by questioning the assertion that Jesus Christ spoke plainly at all times. I mean, I think about the passage in John chapter 6 where he talks about eating my flesh and drinking my blood. And this is such a hard saying that people walk away. Right, and then he says it again, and his disciples even are like, "What are you talking about? I really don't understand this." And he doesn't double down, but he triples down. He often spoke in very complicated parables as well that weren't even clear to his own disciples until after the resurrection. So I don't think it's the case that he always spoke plainly. As far as evangelists today, I mean, could evangelists speak more plainly? I'm sure that's the case. Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, and I think that each person who has an evangelism apostolate should not be afraid of speaking plainly, and should not be afraid of just advancing the gospel of Christ in direct ways. Sometimes I think we can be too clever by half and just think that we can sort of advance the gospel by some, subtle, implicit messaging. But we also should not be afraid to just directly call the world to repent and follow Christ.
Yeah, I think when you have speak very well, just as Christ did, well, people want to crucify you. And this is the proof of your success. This is a good success, okay? Now you're on the cross and you're dying, and you say, oh, well.
A job well done.
Yeah, well done. Yeah. So we must remember that. And maybe, so you spoke, you're among the cannibals, and you're just cooking you. But, at the last rank of all the cannibals, you have one, just praying. Bless you, God, for this meat you are giving us, and this is the beginning of of a change among the cannibals. So you see, well, it happens like that. I'm not sure that well. I think that the question is not a complication in language or something that's very simple. The mystery of Christianity is that very simple people agreed with huge mysteries. For example, the mystery of Trinity. And a heresy is an attempt to say, oh, well, people are too simple, they cannot understand the mystery, we have to simplify. So maybe we're going to say, well, there is one God, one person, but God as the creator, we will call him the Father, as the Savior, the Son, and as the sanctifier, the Holy Spirit, and that's all. And it's more simple. It's a more simple way. And then, but this is heresy. So we have to give the whole mystery to people, even if we don't understand. And this is the miracle, that the mystery of Trinity, I think this is tomorrow mystery. Is it? No, this is the Sunday of Holy Trinity. No, tomorrow? Tomorrow, of course.
Vigil already, yes.
Already, yeah. The first Vespers of... And we have to go through that. So it's not complicating things, but it's not also simplifying things. It's giving the whole charisma.
Juraj, is there anything you want to add? Are evangelists too complicated nowadays?
I'm thinking about the Zach's previous answer, because I cannot see possibility of true liberalism, because the liberalism is reaction on Protestant revolutions, and if we have competing religions, then the answer of liberalism of moving religious sphere out of political life, and when you do this, you cannot have a common good in the society anymore. So I don't see any possibility of having a good liberalism. Just was thinking about what Zach said.
Yeah, but I think that we are trapped in a quarrel of words, because this word liberalism can accept many definitions, and this is the main problem. And when you were talking about post-liberalism, this is also a question, because this concept has been invented as a way to understand what is happening, but invented by Rod Dreher is one of the leader of this of this motto. This is a motto, in fact, and we have to be aware of what's happening really and in the details,
The next most popular question is leading us back to AI. If you were to advise the new Pope while he writes the encyclical on AI, as he pledged to do, what would you say the encyclical should include? No pressure, it's only the next encyclical, so...
Well, Zach, we have here the Pope advisor. Thank you for coming in Bratislava. So,
yeah, I mean, a very difficult question to answer, and I'm certainly not in any position to advise the Holy Father on this. as someone who reads papal encyclicals, I always appreciate it when the encyclicals do not read as the product of some bureaucratic function in the dicastery that produced it, but rather function as a clarion call to follow Christ. So it would be great to have Christ front and center in this encyclical that addresses AI. I think being very clear-eyed about the risks that AI poses while also being level-headed about the risks that it probably does not pose. Yeah. There's a lot of talk about AGI and artificial general intelligence being just around the corner. And there are a lot of AI doomers associated with that who think that because that's the case, we're all going to die. And there are AI boomers who think that we're going to experience the most impressive economic boom that history's ever talked about. The boomers like to talk about the shape of an exponential curve. And they say when people look at an exponential curve, they generally look behind them and say, wow, look how steep it's getting. So it's going to be this steep so far away. And then they turn around to look up the slope, and they're touching the slope because they're that close to the exponential curve. It's just going north so quickly. And so the boomers say that's what's happening. I do not think AGI is right around the corner. I think large language models are able to fool us into thinking that it is, but there are many limitations to what large language models do. They're subject to their training limitations. They're subject to their data inputs. They're not even close to real consciousness. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, no one's developed a robust theory of emergent consciousness in a way that's convincing to me. So I would want to be clear-headed about AGI and the risks that are probably not posed by AGI. I wanted to take a step back and talk about the human person as made in the image of God, and discuss why a computer cannot have consciousness. And that I wanted to talk more specifically about the actual practical dangers that are posed by AI, even in its current form, that it will displace workers, especially white-collar workers, that companies will be tempted to cut corners and fire people because they can have AI do their job for a lot less money, almost no money, relatively speaking. And I'd wanted to remind companies that humans have an infinite dignity because they're endowed with the dignity that God has given them. And so workers must be treated fairly and not replaced by a computer.
Thank you. I hope you have all been listening carefully so that when the encyclical comes out, you can come back to this talk, look it up on our YouTube channel and compare the points against what Zach said.
But I must say that, the Vatican published a document on AI on January. Right. So we have something already about that. And anyway, you were talking about, the question of unemployment and jobs because of AI, but it may be also something, well, not so bad, because this is the end of the white collars, but the renewal of the blue ones. And you have this sentence of my friend Matthew Crawford, who says you cannot hammer a nail through the internet. So okay, you have AI, okay, but I have a problem with plumbery and with hammering a nail on my wall, and so now we can go back to handwork and to carpentry, and this is also wonderful. Not to be an engineer, not to be on Excel all the day. This is good.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Over there at the back, if we can get the microphone to the gentleman, please.
Good evening. My question is for all three gentlemen.
Your shadow. No, maybe you can come in the light. No.
Okay. It's not really necessary.
I like to see your face.
Okay. So, hi Fabrice. I'm Shimon. My question is for all three of you, because the title of this talk was Reconciliation and Disruption, Catholicism in the Future, or something like that. And I'm very curious whether you actually saw some, let's say, creative disruption done by Catholics from clearly Catholic stance within your respective culture, which helped maybe to do some cultural shift from which we can just which was good and which might be inspiration for us. That's it.
I would say Fabrice's writings are a good example of disruption. And I would say when we spoke about the window of opportunity, so maybe in coming years there could be opportunity to disrupt this secularist order somehow.
Do you guys want to share some examples of inspiring Catholic disrupting initiatives that are inspiring to you?
I mean, I tend to think that Hallow is doing something pretty disruptive, and we don't claim to do it perfectly, and we're stumbling along as we learn, but we're trying to introduce people to a life of prayer through giving them a tool on their phones that they can use instead of Instagram or instead of TikTok or whatever the case is. And it's been very successful so far, and we've had people write into us to tell us they're becoming Catholic because they encountered a life of prayer through Hallow, or they're coming back to the church, or their marriage is restored. And so that's certainly an example of disruption that's really a pleasure to work on. There's some Catholic creators in America who are doing really good work. I like Matt Fradd a lot. He's taken the very popular Joe Rogan interview format, and he's done it in a Catholic way, and he's had very accessible but intriguing, curiosity-provoking conversations with people. Not exactly across the political spectrum, but certainly across the Catholic spectrum, which has been really interesting. And there are a variety of podcasters who have taken that format and taken it on for themselves. So I think that's an example of creative disruption. There's some really interesting publishing houses in the U.S. Clooney Media is one that's kind of restoring and republishing previously out of print Catholic classics, which is really neat. There's one called Wise Blood Books that's trying to do. They're an independent publisher, but they're commissioning original fiction, and so that's an example of kind of creative disruption. So those are a couple of things I've seen in America.
One final initiative from you,
Well,
Fabrice. Then I have a final
very
question. We really have to finish
things.
now.
I'm going to call my mother. This is very disruptive. As soon as I have a Jewish mother, it will be a long talk, but I think. Just do very simple thing. For example, you're going in a restaurant and you stand up and you bless the food, in front of everybody. And this is very simple gestures, and it looks very disruptive, but it's also something so elementary, and we have to go to these elementary things.
My final short question for each of you. This was a discussion about the new things in the church today, the things that perhaps are determining how the church, how we as the church are facing the world as it is now, how it perhaps will look in the future. My final question for each of you is, when you think about the church in the future, say in 20 years' time, what one image appears in your mind? What visual image appears to you if we speak about Catholicism of the future? Very shortly, each one of you, then we close. It has to be the first thing that comes to your mind, so you should be speaking already.
Okay, it should be young church. It will be young church.
You said image. I think I took it literally because I was just picturing the icon of Christo Pantokrator, the Christ the King.
Fabrice, last word.
I was, I had this image of a Graham Greene short story, a poor pope, sharing bread with poor people in the street. And, this is my image.
Thank you. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for this discussion about what Catholicism right now looks like, what the challenges that it faces look like, and how the future of our church that we love so dearly might look. I want to thank Fabrice, Zach, and Juraj for joining me tonight with a big round of applause. And as the applause comes, I invite on the stage our musicians again. The second piece is called Paul Vranitzky Allegretto. Excuse me, we stay seated. We stay seated.